Sometime in the spring of 2009, a butler named Pascal Bonnefoy tucked a small dictaphone under a cloth on a tea tray and carried it into the sitting room of Liliane Bettencourt's mansion in Neuilly-sur-Seine. Over the next 12 months, he captured roughly 21 hours of private conversation inside one of the wealthiest homes in France, transferred everything onto 28 CD-ROMs, and handed the collection to the one person he believed could stop what was happening. When those tapes leaked to the press in June of 2010, they tore open one of the biggest wealth scandals Europe had ever seen, brought down a French president, and exposed a billion-dollar transfer that nobody outside the family was ever supposed to know about. This is the story of a fortune so large that controlling it became a matter for the courts, the press, and the presidency of France. To understand how any of that happened, you have to go back to the woman at the center of it, and to the fortune she inherited from a father with a very dark past. A single hair dye formula called Aureole launched Eugene Schuler's company in 1909, and within 3 decades, he had built it into a cosmetics empire. Schuler also bankrolled La Cagoule, a violent far-right paramilitary group that held its meetings inside El Oriol headquarters during the 1930s. When France fell to Germany in 1940, resistance never crossed his mind. He profited. Company sales nearly quadrupled under occupation, and French intelligence later named him a voluntary collaborator of the SS commander responsible for deporting French Jews. None of it stuck. The charges were dropped, and once the war ended, Schuler filled El Oriol's executive ranks with several former extremists, including Jacques Corrèze, who climbed all the way to running the American division. August of 1957 brought Schuler's death, and Liliane, his only child, took over a controlling stake in the company at 35 years old. L'Oréal shaped Liliane's entire childhood. Her mother died when she was 5, and by 15 she had joined the company as an apprentice, mixing cosmetics and labeling shampoo bottles by hand. A marriage in 1950 tied her to André Bettencourt, a French politician carrying his own wartime record. André had written more than 60 anti-Semitic articles for a German-financed newspaper early in the occupation, before switching sides and joining the resistance late in the war. Political ambition carried him through cabinet posts under de Gaulle and Pompidou, eventually lifting him to deputy chairman of L'Oréal. When those articles surfaced publicly in 1994, the exposure forced his resignation and a transfer of all his shares to Liliane. Françoise, their only daughter, arrived in 1953 and chose a completely different path. Quiet and bookish, she married Jean-Pierre Myers, the grandson of a rabbi murdered at Auschwitz, converted to Judaism, and raised their 2 sons in the Jewish faith. The Bettencourts lived in an Art Deco mansion in Neuilly-sur-Seine, its walls covered with Matisse, Picasso, Leger, and Mondrian. $30 billion. That was what Forbes attached to Liliane in 1999 when they ranked her the richest woman alive. She held roughly 30% of L'Oréal, along with a 3% stake in Nestlé she had picked up back in 1974, a hedge against the possibility that France's incoming socialist government might try to nationalize the company. From the outside, this looked like the most secure fortune in Europe. Inside that mansion, Liliane Bettencourt felt trapped. Journalist Tom Sankton, who wrote the definitive account of the affair, described her existence as a gilded cage, calling it a very constrained, confined, codified, bourgeois life. That cage cracked open in 1987 when a photographer named François-Marie Bagné walked through the door. Bagné was 40 at the time, openly gay, a celebrated novelist and photographer who moved through the highest circles of Parisian society and counted Salvador Dalí, Samuel Beckett, and Isabelle Adjani among his close friends. Egoist magazine sent him to photograph Liliane alongside Federico Fellini, and according to Sankton, they just kind of hit it off. Sankton describes what grew from that meeting as a platonic love affair. Bonnier injected chaos and irreverence into a world built on deference, ordering Liliane to change her clothes, pushing back on her thinking, refusing to treat her the way everyone else did. She later told Paris Match, "I couldn't live with him for more than 5 minutes, but that muddle in our friendship brought me intense pleasure." What she never mentioned was how much that pleasure cost. Art came first. 11 paintings by Picasso, Matisse, Mondrian, and Leger went to Bonnier in 2001, and together they carried a valuation of 20 million euros. Life insurance policies followed. In 2003, a hospital stay preceded Liliane signing over a policy worth 253 million euros, and 3 years later, after another hospital visit, a second policy valued at 262 million landed in his name. Then came Heiress, a private island in the Seychelles, transferred to Bonnier as its eventual beneficiary. When investigators pressed him about it later, his response was dismissive. "That island, I hate it. It's full of mosquitoes, tiny, and very humid." And then came the will, naming Bonnier as Liliane's sole heir for every asset outside L'Oréal, somewhere between 1 billion and 1.3 billion euros. That was the documented total by the time anyone tried to intervene. The losses weren't limited to Bonnier. Liliane had also fallen victim to Bernard Madoff's Ponzi scheme, losing approximately 22 million euros in 2008. Françoise Bettencourt-Meyers launched her Counterattack on December 19, 2007, exactly 1 month after her father André died, filing a criminal complaint against Bonnier for abus de faiblesse, a charge under French law for exploiting someone's physical or psychological frailty for personal gain. Liliane struck back fast. She told Le Journal du Dimanche, "I can't understand what fly bit my daughter, maybe jealousy." She labeled Françoise something inert and declared that if her daughter seized control, she would leave France. Her own lawyer put it in starker terms, telling the press that Bettencourt stood ready for nuclear war with her daughter. Which brings us back to the butler. Bonnefoy had served the household since 1989, and after André died, alarm crept in over what he witnessed closing in around Liliane. He later testified that there was no longer anyone to warn her, to watch out for her. Bonnier and Liliane's financial advisor, Patrice de Maistre, wanted him gone, or so Bonnefoy believed. So he hid the dictaphone. And the tapes captured everything. Undeclared bank accounts holding more than 100 million euros surfaced on the recordings, stashed in Switzerland and Singapore. Tax evasion discussions between Bettencourt and de Maistre played back with startling clarity. One recording caught Liliane unable to recall signing over the Seychelles island at all, and that was on tape too. Another captured France's sitting budget minister, Eric Worth, maneuvering to land his wife a position managing the Bettencourt fortune. Mediapart and Le Point published excerpts in June 2010, and what had been a family dispute became a national crisis overnight. A former Bettencourt accountant alleged that 150,000 euros in cash had been funneled to Nicolas Sarkozy's 2007 presidential campaign through the UMP party treasurer, telling investigators that cash envelopes were handed to politicians at the mansion on a regular basis. France's sitting president was now tangled in a billionaire heiress's money scandal. Timing turned the whole thing toxic. Sarkozy had already pushed through a tax policy known as the Fiscal Shield, and under that program, Bettencourt received a 30 million euro rebate in 2008 while Worth ran the budget. The picture forming in the public mind proved almost impossible to dislodge: a president who slashed taxes for the ultra-rich, whose budget minister's wife worked for that same billionaire, and whose campaign may have been funded with illegal cash from her mansion. Formal investigation reached Sarkozy in March 2013, targeting him for abus de faiblesse. Prosecutors dropped everything that October for lack of evidence, but most observers agreed the Bettencourt affair played a real part in his losing the 2012 presidential election to François Hollande. Behind those headlines, the human cost kept climbing. Olivier Metzner, the high-profile lawyer who represented Françoise throughout the affair, turned up dead off his island in Brittany in March of 2013. A suicide note was left behind at his home. A former nurse to Bettencourt attempted to take his own life on the eve of his trial. A senior police detective involved in the investigation also died by suicide. Sancton compressed the wreckage into a single sentence. An army of lawyers made millions. An eminent barrister and a senior police detective committed suicide. A witness tried to hang himself. A tarnished president lost re-election. One of France's proudest companies was threatened with a Swiss takeover. One woman's fortune, and the fight over who controlled it, reached into the French presidency, the courts, the press, and the lives of people who had nothing to do with the original dispute. Some of them did not survive it. October 17, 2011, altered the course of everything. Medical experts diagnosed Liliane with dementia and advancing Alzheimer's, and a family judge placed her under legal guardianship. Jean-Victor Myers, her grandson, became her personal guardian at 25 years old, while her wealth, estimated at 16 to 17 billion euros, fell under joint management by Françoise and both grandsons. Liliane had sensed what was coming. She told Le Journal du Dimanche that she was trembling, that all she could do was pray, and that she worried whether the judge would side with her daughter. She said she would not sleep well that night, and that she had a feeling she was going to be squashed. In January 2012, her appeal was rejected, and 1 month later, she stepped off L'Oréal's board for the last time. Jean-Victor took her seat. May 28, 2015. The Bordeaux court verdict landed and convicted 8 defendants. 3 years in prison, with 6 months suspended, a €350,000 fine, and orders to repay 158 million euros. That was what François-Marie Bagné received. Demestre drew 30 months, with 12 suspended. Worth walked out acquitted on every count. Prosecutor Gérard Aldige delivered a closing argument that lingered. He imposed his control over her like a spider spinning its web, and once he had her in his net, he never let her go. She became his thing. He dealt with her like a vampire. The image of control stayed with the court. August 2016 reshaped the outcome on appeal. With Bagné's prison sentence fully suspended, his fine raised to 375,000 euros, and the 158 million euro damages award cancelled entirely. Liliane Bettencourt died on the night from September 20th to 21st, 2017, at her home in Neuilly-sur-Seine at the age of 94. Françoise announced it simply: "My mother has left peacefully." $39.5 billion. That was what Forbes placed her fortune at when she died. Other estimates ran closer to $44.3 billion, which would have ranked her the 14th richest person on Earth. Everything passed to Françoise. And what happened next surprised almost everyone. The fortune grew. December 2023 marked the moment Françoise Bettencourt Myers became the first woman in history to cross $100 billion in personal wealth, with the family still holding 34.76% of L'Oréal through their holding company Tethys Invest, a company that posted 43.48 billion euros in sales in 2024 alone. February 2025 brought another shift when Françoise announced her retirement from L'Oréal's board after 28 years, handing the role to her son, Jean-Victor, who stepped in as vice chair. The quiet, bookish daughter that Liliane once dismissed as inert had spent a decade clawing through the courts, endured public humiliation, watched her mother denounce her in national newspapers, and emerged on the other side as the steward of the single largest fortune ever held by a woman. Bagné continues to photograph and exhibit his work, still close to Johnny Depp and Vanessa Paradis, still godfather to their daughter Lily Rose. When asked whether the affair was behind him, he answered that it was not behind him, but in him. Because she is an extraordinary woman, and I'm very fortunate to have lived 40 years of friendship with her. After a decade of litigation, 2 trials, billions of euros in dispute, multiple deaths, a toppled presidency, and a clinical diagnosis of dementia. None of the people involved ever fully agreed on what actually happened inside that mansion. The story later inspired Netflix's 2023 documentary, The Billionaire, the Butler, and the Boyfriend. Liliane Bettencourt was either a vulnerable woman exploited by a predator or a lonely billionaire who spent her money exactly the way she wanted to and had it clawed back by a daughter she never liked. The courts decided. That question has not gone away.